It was a complex situation back in the day when the idea of a Finland as a nation among nations was very fragile still, but it started to be discussed among Finnish intellectuals and artists and so on. And there were problems though, because the culture was split. There was the Swedish-speaking, educated class, lots of artists were Swedish speakers. Many, but not all, were bilingual. The Finnish intellectuals finally got split into two groups. There were the Swedish language supporters and the Finnish language fanatics and supporters who had a really hard time trying to find a common approach to the idea of a nation and to the idea of a Finnish culture, whatever that, because they couldn't define what it means. So there's infighting plus oppression. Enter Sibelius. He really became not only a symbol of unity, but he actually practically managed to bridge those two sides. He grew up as a Swedish speaker. He fell in love with a girl who was also a Swedish speaker, but her family was an ardent Finnish language supporter. So Sibelius, in order to get to where he wanted to get, he had to learn Finnish. He was able to draw material from the Finnish side of literature, the folk poetry, of course, Kalevala, but also other Finnish-speaking poets. And he composed songs based on Runeberg and some Swedish poets in Swedish. In a way, because we were talking about music, the issue of language became completely irrelevant, or at least a lot less important. And when he started writing his orchestral music and his symphonies and so on, it became very powerful because the Finns read a lot into the Second Symphony, for instance, the troubled second movement and the active scherzo and then the sort of triumphant finale. Of course, for the Finns at the time, the narrative was crystal clear in their minds. I'm not so sure that Sibelius ever saw it that way when he wrote it, but it really became a symbol of the struggle and the victory that was going to be there somewhere in the future. So art, and more specifically classical music and orchestral music, actually became a political tool. And the position that Sibelius had in this country, in this society, in this culture, became oversized, I would say. I think that the dichotomy between the Finnish and Swedish identity and source material was very useful for Sibelius. I think it was a dynamo. The clash produced a lot of ideas and creative energy in his case. Not many other composers at the time were fighting with that sort of issue. If you think of all the Germans, well, we are like a logical continuation of the German culture, and we follow in the footsteps of Bach and Beethoven, and Sibelius never had that. He was by and large the first one, and geographically the closest major composer was Tchaikovsky, who was just like, I would say 350 kilometers away from here. And Sweden at the time didn't have any. There was Grieg, there was Carl Nielsen in Copenhagen, and then the Germans. Richard Strauss. They were almost the same age. And it's kind of funny or interesting and touching to look at the differences between their early career. When Strauss was something like 15, Hans von Bülow conducted his Wind Serenade with the Berlin Philharmonic, and there's a picture of the young Strauss, teenager, being surrounded and embraced by the members of the Berlin Philharmonic as the next great German hope and so on. At 15, Sibelius was like, I don't know, he was nobody. He had this feeling that he had really missed out. He was a late starter. He auditioned for the Vienna Philharmonic as a violinist, didn't get the job because he just wasn't good enough. Whereas the young Strauss was conducting the best orchestras in the world, and he was being commissioned, and everything was a sensation, and he was a superstar. Nobody had ever heard of Mr. Sibelius. So, in a way, also the fact that he was not seen as the next something was quite a sort of a liberating position to be in. Tough in many ways because he felt isolated, but also inspiring, I think. And then, of course, what happened, and this I cannot emphasize enough, I think it was an absolutely key thing in Sibelius' life and in the city generally. Ferruccio Busoni moves to Helsinki for a few years. And I'm not quite sure why a superstar pianist-composer turns up in Helsinki. So he ended up here. He became the piano teacher at the Helsinki Conservatory. And of course, Busoni brings in the sort of cosmopolitan approach. He was a thinker. He was a fantastic pianist. He was a really, really interesting composer too. And young Sibelius, of course, finds a spiritual brother. And they party hard. They had a group of drinking buddies they called Leskovites, based on Busoni's dog's name, which was Lesko. The fact that Busoni was here made Sibelius feel more connected, and so on. I think it was absolutely crucial. Again, an impulse from outside, connection. That's what culture is all about. Nothing can exist in isolation.